Welcome to Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup. I'm your host, Jason Bland, and tonight is episode 100. We're streaming live on Facebook, and we're streaming out to Late Night in the Midlands Radio Network, and tonight's guest is Varla Ventura. She's written a number of books on the mythological, the fascinating past of, legends of creatures of the night. One of my favorite books I'm reading right now is Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires. Almost finished with it. And the reason I got into this, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, is because of a Banshee experience I had. So for episode 100, this is kind of fitting. I got into the paranormal really because of an experience I had with a Banshee. We're going to talk about that quite a bit with our guest. All right, guys, and of course we'll have the call-in lines in the show. I'll give those out a little bit later. And we're going to do the World Wide Web of Weird like we like to do every Sunday night. All right, guys, be with you in just one sec. Welcome to Paranormal Soup. Like I said, I'm your host, Jason Bland, and tonight is our 100th episode. When I started this, it's almost been 2 years now. I thought, wow, what would it be like to get to 100 episodes to do that? Because I only do the show once a week. It's all I can afford to do time-wise. I would do it every night if I could, but that's not going to happen. But it feels really cool to be to our 100th episode. Now, of course, I have my co-host with me. Let me get that screen up. There we go. Now, for people on Late Night in the Midlands, we're still new on that network. This isn't our 100th episode on there, but it's our 100th episode of webcast. You always can find us on Paranormal Soup's YouTube channel for all of our old episodes. This is our guest tonight. How you doing tonight, Varla? Oh, you're still muted, I think. There you go.
I'm unmuted. I'm good.
And we got our chorus. Oh, Rob just joined in. We got Rob Archery as well. How you doing tonight, Rob?
Doing pretty good. How about everybody else?
Doing great. Great to see you. Jeffrey Chan on our video engineer. He'll be holding our World Wide Web of Weird. And he just disappeared. That's not good. Come back, Jeff. We need you for the World Wide Web of Weird. You have to wait a second for that.
Congrats on the 100th episode, man. Awesome.
Yeah, something happens on the 100th episode. How you doing, Jamie? Hopefully Jeff's getting back on, I hope. I don't want to run the World Wide Web of Weird without him.
Doing good, and he should be back on any moment.
Okay. And Varla, we're going to talk tonight, like I said, jump in on the World Wide Web of Weird as soon as we get Jeff back to run it on any of the articles or stuff we're talking about. And I can't wait to talk to you about Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires. Now, hopefully, Jeff's going to be back by the time I get to my intro, but I'm going to go ahead and roll the intro. Hopefully, Jeff will be back by then. Otherwise, I'll have to start pulling up the articles. Hopefully, he's back. First time that's happened, right before the World Wide Web of Weird. All right, there we go. Tonight on the World Wide Web of Weird, we're going to start off with a haunted doll. We've had a few of those on the World Wide Web of Weird, and what's more creepier than a haunted doll? I think, so why do people collect them? I saw one article about a guy who's collecting them. That's not what this one's about. Let me go ahead and get the screen up there for Jeff. All right. This first article comes from thesun.co.uk. This is about a haunted doll. Now, not your typical creepy-looking doll, as we've had on the show. This one looks like just a regular kind of China doll. But it does remind me of an Amazing Story doll, actually. There's a couple, there was an Amazing Story. With a guy and a doll. It was really creepy. It was John Cleese. All right, so the Sun here. An unwanted visitor, terrified mom, is desperate to sell haunted doll that scratched her husband and set off smoke alarms. We've had that happen. Terrified mom is desperate to get rid of a haunted doll that she claims to keep setting the smoke alarms off in the middle of the night. Has left her husband covered in scratches and has the ability to move herself around by herself. Debbie Merrick 50, bought 3 pretty china dolls for just $5 from a second-hand shop at the start of July. But since bringing the trio home, she has found her family plagued with supernatural problems. A week after placing her new purchases in her spare room, Debbie's husband, Cameron, 50 as well, was alarmed to find she had woken up one morning with small scratches, or he had woken up with small scratches on his leg. Debbie said the smoke alarms keep going off, and one night I heard floorboards creaking, and I thought it might have been my daughter Holly up. But when I checked on her, she was asleep. Then one morning my husband said to me, "I've got scratches all over my legs." It's definitely hadn't happened before. They looked a bit like cat scratches and were sore. My husband is a complete non-believer. He's still trying to come up with an explanation. The scratches do look like they've been done by something small, like a little doll hand scratched his leg. Holly keeps telling people that the creepy doll scratched her dad's leg. I have had a nightmare about the doll dragging itself along the floor towards me. Ooh, that is creepy. One of the reasons that the family's smoke alarms keep going off is because the spirit in the doll is moving through the house and is causing sudden changes in temperature, triggering the device's heat sensors. Debbie mentioned her toy terror to a medium pal, who immediately freaked out and warned her that the doll had something in it. Well, yeah, sounds like it. Her psychic friend became upset about being under the same roof as the spooky doll, so Debbie placed it in a box in the shed. I'm sure that made the doll happy, but that wasn't the end of it. When she went in, yeah, right? Yeah. You're like, oh, now you locked me up. Now there's going to be some trouble. You thought some scratches were... Yeah, now you pissed it off. When she went to the shed 2 days later, she noticed the doll had moved and its necklace was missing. Debbie said, when I brought the dolls through for my friends to take a look, she said, "Get out, it's got something in it." She refused to sleep in the same house as it. She was freaking out about it. I put it in the shed box and placed things on top of it. Let's see. Then the other day I had to go into the shed and get something, and when I looked in the box, the necklace on the doll was completely off, and the doll was in a different position, I'm sure. When I packed it away, I made sure the necklace was wrapped around his neck about 4 times. I was quite scared of it, to be honest, and I just keep thinking, how? I didn't want to touch it, and when I had to touch it, I felt sick. Now, she goes on, the article goes on, I'm not going to read all of it, but she bought 2 other dolls. I didn't get the pictures of those 2 other dolls, but she believes those have nothing happening. It's just this doll. And the other 2 dolls look, pretty much, very much like this doll. So I don't know. Now she's selling it on eBay. So is the question: is it really haunted, or is this a scam to sell a haunted doll for a ton of money? I just want to get rid of it. Well, I'll tell you how to do that. Go to the garbage and throw it away.
Exactly.
Or give it away for free on eBay. Don't sell it. Give it away for free. There'll be somebody right away to pick it up.
Just go put it on the curb. Someone will come pick it up.
But that's when, you've heard the stories. That's when it ends up back in your doorstep or in your bed. And then the people are really freaking out.
Yeah. She basically set herself up for a horror story there with putting it in the shed and trying to put things on top of it. And,
yeah.
You're just donate it to a paranormal museum. There are several of them.
Oh,
yeah. New one in New Orleans. So that's an option for her if she's listening tonight.
Yeah. I could think of a few paranormal museums and be like, yeah, we'll take her.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
All right. This one comes from the Daily Mail next here. This is another ghost story here. A young couple on tour of North Carolina Palace accidentally filmed the ghost of a female servant who died in a fire casually strolling across a hallway. A young couple had caught footage of what they believed could be a ghost of a female servant in the place where she died in a fire in the 18th century. Daniel Hyde, 21, and Savannah Brown, 23, visited Tryon Palace in North Carolina for a day out with Daniel and filmed a Snapchat video of the interior. Spooky footage shows the ghostly figure of what appears to be a woman in period dress walk past the doorway while carrying a basket. I was only able to get a picture of it. I didn't have the video of it, but you definitely can see it. Now, what about reenactors is what I'm saying. Are the reenactors there? I mean, this looks spooky, but they just don't kind of glare over that in the article. Like, my first question as investigator, are there reenactors? That's to me the biggest clue. Until they address that, you can find this article at the dailymail.co.uk. It says it's hard to tell, but I think she was a younger woman. She was wearing what looked like a servant's dress and carrying a basket. I think because of how old the building was in history, I did feel eerie. We were just going around on the tour and listening to the guide. I wasn't trying to capture anything specific, but showing the surroundings. Only noticed the ghostly figure in the back room. My cousin messaged me saying, "Is that a ghost?" Like I said, they don't talk about any reenactors. Maybe they never saw any reenactors while they were there on the tour, but maybe there are. I don't know. Okay. Next article on the World Wide Web of Weird here is from Unexplained Mysteries. This is this has been viral. I just want to address this. I'm not going to actually read the full article because there's so many of these. You've seen these viral videos, and here's one. This comes from RT or Ripley.com. The article's from Unexplained Mysteries. Mystery surrounds black vortex UFOs. Peculiar alien phenomena has been cited in countries all across the world in recent years. Dubbed smoke vortexes, these anomalous black rings have been cited by hundreds of people everywhere, from the remote wilderness of Siberia to the ends of England's busy M62 motorway. I'm not going to read the whole article of this, but to me, is it anybody just, maybe it's just me, but I'm just thinking, I've seen this. I've seen that kind of smoke ring in the sky. I've seen it from a very large firework explosion in the sky. I've seen that kind of smoke ring. And now we're seeing a ton of them. Now, they look really peculiar. The one I saw vanished pretty quickly, but it was very similar to what you see in this video. I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm not a UFOologist or anything like that. It just seems to me that this could be caused by smoke or a mortar shell going up there or something. I don't know, but we're seeing so many of these lately, and you wonder what's going on, if it is something paranormal or UFO, or is it just like the way the media and the web is, they caught onto something that is totally explainable, but man, they're going to go out there and say, look at this. I don't know. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on what they think the black smoke rings are, but man, it's viral. I see at least one post about it every week. I usually don't even include it in World Wide Web Weird because it's like, oh, another smoke ring in the sky. I'm not saying it's smoke. Maybe it is. Maybe it is something weird, but to me, it's just, where's
Kinda
the
looks
UFO?
like a smoke ring.
Yeah, it looks like a smoke ring. Now, if you had that and then you saw the UFO like zipping off in the distance, I'm cool. Okay, maybe, maybe I'm cool. I don't know. Okay,
Maybe.
all right. Next up.
It reminds me of like when you're watching the fireworks and you see, after the fireworks
That's
have
what
gone
I'm
off,
saying. Yeah.
smoke in so maybe it's some sort of, top secret weapon. We don't know about that takes the form of a circle.
Watch out for the killer circle. Oh, gotta love the World Wide Web of Weird. All right, next up here is from the Daily Record. This one's really cool. I don't know what this is. It looks like a dinosaur to me. It looks like a dinosaur. Residents in a Stirlingshire village react to sightings of a mysterious creature in the field. This comes from the dailyrecord.co.uk. Those living in
Kilburn. Like a prairie dog.
A prairie dog? I don't know. It looks very dinosaur to me, man. Those living in Killearn, have been discussing the odd sight which is captured by a local man, Jimmy Wright, while walking his son's dog. People in the West Stirlingshire village of Killearn could be given Loch Ness a run for its money. Main Street resident Jimmy Wright, 66, snapped this odd sight while he was walking his son's dog on Crown Hill, known locally as the Cowfield. These days, such things cause ripples on social media. Jimmy told Observer, I put it on Facebook, but I was taken back at just how much response it was received. It definitely has people talking. Usually when I hear somebody saying that, I have like this bad sneaking suspicion that he's faked it. What is this? Got him talking, right?
Maybe it's a mutant prairie dog.
Yeah, right.
Because it looks like it's mixed with something, or sometimes you see freak animals, stuff happens in nature, but the top of it, that's what they do. Like that's a prairie dog.
Well,
and
this is, I don't know.
The bottom of it, I don't know what's up with the...
Well, I just looked it up so I could get a closer view on my phone, and it actually has sort of almost like an otter or weasel like
That's what
appearance.
I thought about it.
Like a river otter.
Yeah.
Right, and if it was moving up and down a bunch, it would give it that kind of if it's moving fast and poking its head up,
I wanted to say it was a wet weasel.
Having like a longer neck, and because it does have a little bit of that at my first glance at it, I was like, that's fake. And then I looked at it a little closer and thought, actually, I think that's probably just an animal. And the way that the photo captured it kind of shows the background a little more, so it makes it look a little more transparent because
I think it's wet and the light's kind of shining on its fur a little bit.
You know what else? You can take a river otter, like I did with that cat picture the other day, and you cut out around the otter that's like in the water like this, and then you put it into a foresty kind of background and make it look like it's standing upright.
Yeah, I think it's like she said, an otter or a wet weasel or something like its fur's matted down or something. Yeah,
like a water dog, a river otter.
Yeah, I don't know. All right, we're gonna move on. This This one comes from the Huffington Post. This is a Swiss couple missing for 75 years found frozen in glacier. Marcelian and Francine Dumoulin, sorry, I butchered your names, and they're long gone, were 40 and 37 years old when they went missing in 1942. The remains of the Swiss couple who went missing 75 years ago have been found perfectly preserved on a glacier in the Alps, according to local media reports. The bodies of Marcelian and Francis Dumoulin, they just repeat the article. I hate it when they do that. The Dumoulins, who had 7 children, were last seen August 1942 when they ventured up to the mountain pasture to feed their cattle. Their family said, "It was the first time my mother went with him on such an excursion," the couple's youngest daughter, Marceline, said. She was always pregnant and couldn't climb the difficult conditions of a glacier. Irby Dumoulin, now 79, was just 4 years old when her parents vanished. She said that she and her siblings, who were separated after their parents' disappearance, spent our whole lives looking for them. "I can't say that after 75 years of waiting, this news gives me a deep sense of calm," she says. DNA testing will be done to confirm the identities, the Valais police said in a statement. The photo was published by Lee Martin, shows boots and glass bottle among the items found in the melting ice. And for those listening on Late Night in the Midlands Radio Network, I always will post this to the Facebook Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup page or our Paranormal Soup YouTube channel. I always give the World Wide Web of Weird videos up there so you can see them usually a day or two after the show. You can always find them on the World Wide Web of Weird playlist on Paranormal Soup for any of the videos, but the pictures aren't there. So if you want to see the pictures, you'll have to wait to see the World Wide Web of Weird when it comes out the next day. Okay, let's move on here. This is number 6. After this one is this is my question to everybody. This has been so viral, and it's funny. It's hilarious. A plane evacuated after passenger passes gas, causing nausea and headaches. My question is this real? I mean, is this really, come on, could this really happen? This is, the incident happened when passengers on a flight became ill with nausea and headaches, according to a spokesperson of the Raleigh-Durham International Airport. The flight, which was not identified by RDU officials, landed at the airport around 4 p.m. when the incident was reported. All the passengers were taken off the plane after the incident was investigated. It was determined that a passenger passed gas, the officials said. Authorities later said that the incident was a medical call and directed all questions to the Wake County EMS. RDU officials did not identify whether the plane was from or its destination or what type of aircraft was involved. Is it real? I mean, did they really do that? I mean, did somebody really? I mean, I definitely smelled something that smelled like somebody died inside, but literally evacuated a plane. Is it really real?
I was on a flight back from Costa Rica one time, and somebody farted really bad. And if I could have got off the plane in midair, I would have.
Yeah. I actually travel with like a handkerchief and some kind of essential oil right in my
not a bad plan,
because otherwise, I mean, I travel a lot and it's close quarters, and I think like with the I mean that's like a chain reaction, it's like people have a gag reflex, so I like that they won't admit what airline it is, because that airline doesn't want to become known as like farty air or whatever.
Right. Hey, you know what? Farty air would be a lot better than some of the other airlines have had troubles this year. Beating a passenger to the inch of his life, farty air.
Distraction.
They could use it as a slogan, fly with, but they kicked him off for it. Like, don't eat beans before boarding your plane. United Airlines. Nope, sorry. All right. This is number 7 here. Alien Truth Seekers. This is from the Daily Star, so give it as much credit as you can think of from the Daily Star. But I found this interesting. Alien Truth Seekers discover underground UFO base at Area 51 in a remarkable video. I just have the picture of this up here. A highly classified air base in Nevada, U.S. is commonly believed to hold extraterrestrial life forms. Duh. I think most people watching the show know what Area 51 is. And so-called truth seekers Blake and Brett Cousins have added to the theory by following what they believe is a UFO hangar buried in the mountains nearby. The pair used Google Earth to show an aerial image of the strange sighting. Right in the mountain range, if you see this driveway, it seems to lead to some kind of hidden underground entrance, Blake says. Are these two entries to the base with the mountain range, or are they harvesting minerals out of the mountain, or is there an entrance to a military base? Well, there's a lot of mining, that's what I think. I think it's some kind of old mine and a road that goes to it, in my opinion. But they don't tell you that. There are never before seen images as this possible entrance where they're hiding the UFO and flying saucers recovered from Roswell. The clip has been seen more than 35,000 times since, and it was posted by the brothers' YouTube channel. Whatever they have hidden from the people there must be huge. I haven't had a chance to get on Google Earth. I don't think they even give you directions in this. Like, give me the Google Earth link, and I don't see it in this article. Like I said, from the Daily Star, give me the link. I'll go look at it and tell me. I'm not going to go searching around all over Area 51 on Google Earth and see a bunch of blacked out stuff and not find it. I mean, you can look at Area 51 from Google Earth. I have done it. I don't know. It is a strange one. Oops, I got it on Varla. I'm sorry. Everybody's seen you, Varla. We're talking about an alien base. This is the alien base. I am so sorry. All right, that's the alien base that we're talking about. You know, Jimmy Church just had that one. I forgot where. It's off the top of my head. He's been really talking about pictures he took. I think he took them of a mountain where they see a door opening up. It seemed really interesting, but you know, this could be this could be a mine. It even seems like there's like a semi truck or something down there in a little building. You know, I don't know. I mean, who's to say it's the alien base? I don't know. It does remind me a little bit of what Bob Lazar talked about being built into the side of a mountain for SR1, whatever. If you ever heard the Bob Lazar interviews about his experience there, if it's real, kind of reminds me of that. And that little circle thing's supposed to be, I think, a UFO they spotted there, but I don't know. All right, last up, this one's not paranormal, and we're going to play the video here with the audio. Don't start yet, Jeff. Hold on a second. This is from Yahoo News. This was very viral, and this is me getting on my soapbox for a minute because this totally pissed me off big time. The article's titled, "Oh, he just died. Teens laughing at drowning disabled man in disturbing video." Go ahead and play it for a few.
Yeah, he just got in and started swimming. You junkie! Get out the water, you gon' die! Look at that gator coming towards you, man! Buddy, we not finna help you. You finna got in! Bro, drowning, what the heck? Ain't nobody finna help you, you dumb. Never got in there. Yeah, buddy off that 40. Hell yeah, Brian, you knocked the 40. Yeah, where he at? Hey, buddy off that 85, dude. What made him buddy got in with all his clothes on?
And you're going to stand there and film it like a dumbass.
His head under, buddy. Wow. Am I seeing? What the?
All right, go ahead and stop it because I don't want to listen to these morons anymore. So, yeah, you can see this has been viral. And I've talked about this on this show before, that I believe are breeding monsters. We're going to talk about monsters tonight, you know, banshees, werewolves, vampires. But, you know, my son asked me if monsters are real. What I answer him, I say, there are things out there. I'm truthful with my son. He's 5 years old. I say, you know, I told him a few of my ghost stories. I try not to scare him too much. You know, I know there's ghosts and stuff out there. But what I do tell him, I go, but there are people out there that are monsters that you can't trust. You know, you have to be careful. And there's people just like this that are monsters that will watch you drown and not do a single thing to help you. I'm not even saying go in the water and help this guy. They didn't even call 911. They didn't even, I'm not going to read the whole article. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about it because I want to get moving on. You can find this at yahoo.com.
They didn't even yell for help.
No. And you can watch this video, and when at the end of the video, he goes, "Oh, dude, the guy died," and they left. They actually go up closer and film the body in the water. I didn't show that. I'm not going to show that because that's just so disgusting to do that. I showed the far away video footage. I'm not showing that. But they go up and film the body, and then they leave him there, and he's discovered 3 days later. When the police go to these kids, these guys posted up on social media like the idiots that they are. And the police go to them and ask them, you know, why didn't you report this? They're like, we didn't have to. This is Florida. This was happening, and they don't have to. They don't have a what you call it?
Good Samaritan.
Good Samaritan. Thank you, Jamie. Good Samaritan
They don't
law.
have common sense is what they don't have.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, another Florida story.
I know,
for you,
it's
Rob.
always Florida. I'm sorry. I got to apologize to the whole country because it's Florida.
But, you know, so these cops, you know, were pretty pissed. These kids were smirking and laughing. You know what these cops did? They went back and looked in the record books. Now, I thought this the whole time when I was reading the first article before it was updated. I know just a little bit about law enforcement, my time in it, that most states have you have to report a dead body in a certain time period, or you are breaking the law if you find a dead body. And those cops went back, looked it up, made sure they had that law, and they went and arrested the kids for a misdemeanor. But at least it's something. And I sure it felt good for those cops to wipe those stupid smug smear faces and laughing. You know, we are breeding monsters. I'm not blaming Hollywood. I'm not blaming video games. I'm blaming parents. And, you know, I'm a parent. The struggle's real. It's not easy being a parent. But obviously, these kids' parents failed them in some way that they can't even have a sense of compassion to do anything to help this man and just stand there and laugh about it and then post it on social media like the idiots they are. I hate to get negative on my show, and we're going to have fun tonight, but this really pissed me off, and I don't usually cover this stuff, but it just to no end. I mean, just recently, somebody in my neighborhood hit a 5-year-old child and drove off. How do you do that? How do you do that? I don't know. You know, he turned himself in the next day. I'll give him that. But how he drove off, I guess, scared. I'll give him that. But these people weren't even scared. They had nothing to be scared of. All they had to do is just stop filming and call. But they didn't. So that's it. I'm getting off my soapbox. I'm sorry. I apologize to my audience. But it's like something that's been burning in me since I saw this video. I had to get it out there. And my show is my outlet. I do have a mic. And if you ever see anybody share some crap like this, they videotape something awful and they put it up there, you know, unfriend them, report them. You know, this crap has to stop. So, all right, we're going to be coming back after the commercial break here with our guest, Varla Ventura. We're going to talk about banshees, werewolves, and vampires. I'm going to talk about my own little bit about my banshee experience. I've talked about it on the show before. It's what got me into paranormal, to be honest. Seeing a green floating head fly into the room changes your perspective at 4 years old and makes you believe anything's possible. All right, guys, we'll be back with you in just 1 sec. All right, tonight's guest is Varla Ventura. The reason I was so excited, this is our episode 100 what we're doing tonight. I got into the paranormal because ever since I was a little kid, I've always believed that there's something, another universe, other creatures of the night. Why do I believe that? Because I saw something with my cousin, a witness, actually, my cousin Phil. We were 4 years old. We had played in this ditch that day. I remember getting all muddy and stuff, and his mom, we were at his mom's boyfriend's house, cleaned us up. Later that night, put us to bed, and I could hear this cry. I heard like this, like crying, like a woman crying. I thought it was my aunt. And, you know, I was 4 years old. I can't remember the exact conversation. But I know I said something to my cousin. I was hearing something. And then this green mist in the corner in this room started to form. And we could see, like, this glowing green mist. And I could hear the crying start to get louder. And then there was just, like, pop. And this green head came throwing right out of the wall through the room, and that cry turned into a wailing scream. In I think it was in my head because I could put my hands over my ears, and the sound wouldn't go away. And my cousin took the blanket and threw it up over us, and we're crying. 4 years old. Imagine seeing something like that. It looked like the Wicked Witch of the West, to be honest. What it reminds me of, you know, the green face. My cousin, you know, put that blanket over her head, and that wailing did stop. For a second there, I thought, maybe it's gone. I go to lift up the blanket. My cousin's like, I can remember him going, no, 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 no. I lift up the blanket, and I hear the scream, and it come rushing down at me like that. He jumped off the bed as soon as I had lifted up the blanket, threw me off the bed. I land flat on the ground, and there's this thing hovering around me, screaming. I hurry up and crawl under the blanket as my cousin's grappling with the door. And he gets the door open. We go outside to his mom and her boyfriend. And they go in that room, of course, turn on the light, and there's nothing there. When I was 13 years old, many years later, I never forgot this. I always remembered it. It's shaped and molded my imagination. I asked my cousin, I go, you remember that green floating head? I watched his face completely white. He's like, I thought that was a dream. He's like, I don't want to talk about it. I got it out of him. He remembered it, but he never heard the screaming or wailing. He just saw it. I'm Irish. My great-grandfather, I thought it was great-great, but it was just a great-grandfather, immigrated from Ireland, David James Kelly. And he married a Cherokee woman. Now, I've been looking into my family's background. I'm trying to find out more about that. You know, there's a lot of Kellys in Ireland, and who knows. But banshees, we'll talk about tonight, Varla. What do you think it was? Do you think that was a banshee I saw? My gut has always told me it was.
Well, I mean, the sound is probably the key indicator there. And some people think that technically banshees are only Irish, and the word banshee is an Irish word. But there are many counterparts or equivalents of banshees throughout the world, and stories of different variations. The thing that makes me think that that was some kind of banshee is the sound, because banshees are associated with not just the wailing and the screaming, which you also heard, but they can also be first heard as a cry.
That's what
They're associated with women who possibly either lost a child or died in childbirth. And so it's said that they're these, sort of mournful spirits that roam the countryside. And that sound of a woman crying will attract people to, it will cause someone to creak open their door, look outside, and then they'll see this somewhat hideous thing transformed. There are a lot of accounts of banshees being sort of like a little old lady walking down the road that you approach, and then she transforms into something kind of hideous, or a very beautiful woman who then transforms into this kind of gnarling, gnashing teeth. And, the disembodied head aspect of it, I mean, it's definitely seen more as like an ethereal being.
Yeah.
Banshees straddle that world between fairies and ghosts. They sort of fit both categories, and many of what we might consider counterparts to the banshees are also considered warning ghosts. And so I think the other thing that's very significant about this experience that you had is that two of you saw it at the same time.
Right.
So you both, whether you saw the exact same thing or heard the same thing, you both saw something and sensed it enough to be scared and have that shared experience. That makes it particularly rare. And it was once believed that, it's not once believed, I mean, this is sort of the origin of banshees, is that the banshees were inherited. And other parts of the world, you might have an inherited family ghost that serves to warn certain members of the family when death is imminent, or a grave illness, or even sometimes, warning ghosts would arrive, the evening before an enemy attack, something like that. And in Ireland, there were sort of the original clans, and each of them had a banshee or ghost that was associated with either their place, which was, their traditional lands and their castles. And then ultimately, as people moved more, they became associated with the people themselves. And of course, things have kind of, gotten muddy, and we've bred out throughout the world. And so we have a lot of different shared kind of cultures and their idea of what is a banshee or a warning ghost. I guess the fact that she was crying like a woman, and it kind of made you think, oh, is that my aunt crying? And then it transformed into this hideous scream. And then I guess I would just ask you, I mean, you were 4, so you may not have been privy to this information so much, but
no, not at all.
Usually are, I'm sorry. But
I wouldn't have been privy to it at all. I didn't know what a banshee was back then. It was until years later, when I getting into the paranormal and the reading so much that I have, that's the closest thing I could think of.
Right, and you read a description, you thought, well, that sounds like this could be what I experienced. And I think, but what you might not have been aware of is if that banshee was predicting some kind of death or illness or mayhem in your family at the age of 4, you may not have known that was happening. But now as an adult, you can ask family members, what was actually happening in our family at that period of time? Was this, it's terrifying, but there's a certain sweetness to banshees, because they don't really cause death. They actually serve as a warning.
A messenger.
And so, yeah, as a messenger. And so, I mean, sweetness might be the wrong term, but it is sort of a, you were shown something and you were given a kind of a message, and that's not something to, I mean, of course you would never be able to forget that, but that's a very, I mean, that is a gift in its own way. There are many people who will go their whole lives investigating paranormal places and, searching for fairies and UFOs, and will never have any kind of profound experience.
With a witness.
And some people are, born with it.
And with a witness. The fact that my cousin saw it and remembered.
Right, and it still scares him, right? He doesn't want to talk about it. No. Yeah.
I'm sorry for jumping right into the Banshee thing. I guess it's been built up to me ever since I booked you. It's just
that's great. I love Banshees.
We're going to talk more than just Banshees, but it's like what I wanted to get off. I couldn't wait. I've been reading your book. She sent me. This is the perks of doing a show. I don't get paid to do a show. I do it because I love it. But the perks that I get from it is getting free books. Yeah, this is one of the books she sent. She sent me two. That's so awesome. Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires, and Other Creatures of the Night. That one I'm almost finished with, and I just started reading Fairies, Pukas, and Changelings. This is the other one she gave me here, if you can see it. And the links for these books, guys, tonight are in the Facebook event. I won't put them in the YouTube thing because that's how I got banned from YouTube. Putting links in there. Yeah, isn't that stupid? So they won't be on YouTube, but go to my Facebook. We have all the links there. Jamie, if you can tonight, if you got any of those links to the Amazon or her website. What is your website before we get, because we'll mention it again in the show.
Yeah, it's myname.net, so it's varlaventura.net.
And I want to, we'll get into the Banshees. I just wanted to jump into that story to start the night off with a little spooky feeling. But how did you get in? I know how I just told you how I got involved in the paranormal. What got you into this to decide I want to do a lot of research and write these books about all these strange mythological creatures, or not? Maybe, I don't know if you want to call them mythological. I don't know what the best words are for them. What you want to describe them as?
I kind of call them magical creatures. That's my big umbrella term for them. And, people call them all different kinds of things. But, I just kind of say, that's the magical creature. And, myths and reality often merge together. So there's a lot of, the folkloric record is rich and full of, stories and firsthand accounts and third-hand accounts and fifth-hand accounts and, 20 generations later accounts. So there's a lot of variation in there. But yeah, I just kind of grew up in a environment that was encouraging, maybe, certainly welcoming of the paranormal and the sort of strange side of life. My mom always had a lot of very interesting books on her shelf. She studied a lot of Dion Fortune and the Kabbalah and the Tarot and things like that. And so those were household.
Like my bookshelf, right?
It's somewhat like my bookshelf now. But as a young child, to me, other people, I don't know what other people had on their mother's bookshelves, but these dusty old books were common household words to me. And as were ghosts, paranormal experiences, psychic experiences, parlor games, cemetery picnics. And it's not to say that my mom was, Morticia Adams and sat around, chopping the heads off roses and gather around children. It was not that kind of environment. It was more of a reverence for sort of the other side of life. And that came from my mom's own personal experiences and things that she, I think, inherited from my grandmother and her sort of psychic abilities. And so that was, it was encouraged, and it certainly wasn't discouraged. And, when I had experiences where I saw something or, I had a nightmare, I remember my mom teaching me to lucid dream when I was 2 or 3 years old. Which,
I like your mom already.
It's the perfect age to teach lucid dreaming because kids are so suggestible at that point.
You know what? That's wow. I didn't even think about trying to teach my son that. He has a nightmare problem.
Okay, so then you just give him. I'll give you my quick anecdote that my mom had for my nightmare. I had a recurring nightmare, and I'm still to this day I remember vividly this recurring nightmare, and I remember the terror that I associated with it. if I were to have that nightmare now, I would have probably a different experience with it. But I still remember, that's a memory I have from, I must have been probably 3 years old. And I was running through a field and I fell into this hole and I couldn't get out of this hole. And so my mom said, fine, go back to sleep, have the dream again. But this time when you fall in the hole, imagine our Great Dane is going to drop a rope down and pull you out. And she said, just go back to sleep and have the dream again. But this time the dog's going to rescue you. And so I did exactly what my mom told me to do. And I fell back asleep and I had the dream and the dog rescued me. And after that, I never had the nightmare again. So it was just like, and I didn't realize it until much later that is lucid dreaming, being self-aware in your dream and then changing it and conjuring what you need. And children are more than, that's natural for them. So if you can give him something he can imagine,
right,
that would actually work, he might have to try it a few times. I don't know, maybe, the Lego guys come and save him or
right.
Whatever.
I have dreams like that at least 3 times a week. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I know the dream didn't finish right at the spot, and it's like I don't want to go back to sleep sometimes because I don't want it to play out. So I'll actually sit up for a little bit and come up with the ending that I want to happen, and then try to go back to sleep and have that ending play out.
You know what the dreams my son has that are reoccurring, not to get off, we'll get back on top of it, but it was really interesting is that he told me, I have the same dream over and over of driving around. He's 5 years old, remember, of driving around and I'm lost. And it stopped me because when I was a kid, I had that same dream. You ask my wife, I don't like to drive. And when I was a little kid, I used to have this dream of the 2 recurring dreams. One of them was water, being on a beach and this huge typhoon of water. That was one. I still have that one. But when I was a kid, I used to have this dream where I'd be lost driving around like an adult, but as a kid. I get
lost on my motorcycle, like always going back to my old house, but I'm always on a motorcycle and I'm always getting lost, even though I know exactly where I'm at.
So weird for a 5-year-old to have that dream. But I want to get back on topic. We want to get back to the vampires, werewolves, and banshees, and oh my, the good stuff, But I just thought that is interesting. Thank you for the advice. I'm definitely never even thought about trying to tell my kid how to kind of lucid dream to try to affect his dream. I have said, you can take control of your dreams, but I haven't gotten it that good description to try to get him to do it.
Yeah, so I think the key for what worked for me when I was that age was that my mom gave me a really applicable solution immediately that I could conjure up, and that solved that.
That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, that's what I thought about it. Now, when real quick, Jamie, when I'm checking on our Facebook live feed, I keep seeing the 100th episode thing up. Are you guys getting are they getting the live video feed? I just wanted to check that really quick.
I'm not sure. My chat and everything's all messed up, but every so often I see it kind of pop up.
No, that's like
I'm live direct. I had to refresh though.
Oh, so you did get there is a live feed going for people. I just wanted to check that because it's being funny on my end. So, okay, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Just want to make sure we're out there streaming. And people, if you do have trouble on Facebook Live, refresh, like Rob said, or you can go to Late Night in the Midlands and at least listen to the show on TuneIn or on Late Night in the Midlands Radio Network.com. We got out the music you hear tonight. You don't hear on Facebook, you'll hear on the network. Okay, so when we talk about Banshees, let's start out with that. I started in your book, you talked about, you kind of got into the Banshee things because of a band.
Oh, well, that's kind of how the book started out, was making the comparison of like Susie and the Banshees, which, any reputable goth worth their salt in their 40s now will know who Susie is.
I'm 38. I know him though.
Yeah, and she adopted that name. She would have very, very dark eye makeup and have this beautiful kind of enchanting voice. She still does. In fact, I think the album out not that long ago. But the idea, one thing about the Banshees that kind of really intrigued me, and as it happened, I didn't send you this book, but I was working on my book about mermaids almost simultaneously with the book about banshees, werewolves, and vampires. I literally wrote them both kind of like I'd work on one and then I'd work on another. And one was due earlier with the publisher. But I was kind of like, the ideas kept crossing over, and a lot of the stories that I was reading were coming from these old public domain books where I would be reading about mermaids, and then the next chapter would be about banshees, because they'd be these old collections of like Irish folklore or Welsh folklore. But banshees in that same way have something in common with mermaids, and sirens, the idea of this kind of song or this like howl that sort of attracts you. Whereas I think, mermaids are perhaps a little more beautiful in sound. There are accounts of banshees, actually, the wail being very enchanting and being very mournful, but in a way that, you go outside to seek and find what it is, and it kind of draws you in. So if you've ever been to a funeral in Ireland or with someone of Irish descent, and you've heard keening at a funeral, which is sort of a way of mourning, and it sounds like a song. I always think of the Banshee song being something like that.
I actually played for if you're on Facebook, you didn't hear it. I played Enya, who's a Celtic Irish, and I was playing that in the background for the radio network while I was telling the story, because I always felt like that song I was playing is like the mournful part. When I first started to hear like the moaning kind of cry, that song always reminds me of it.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it turned really nasty quick once the head reappeared. It was totally different.
I would completely agree with you that was a banshee, and I don't know what it was warning you of, but it was.
Well, you asked what was going on in my family. My father took off when I was 2, and I think, if I remember right, it was around 3 or 4 years old when he cut off complete communication with everybody in the family. And I always wondered, maybe he died, and maybe that was the way the banshee told me. Now, just in the last couple of years, found out somebody is using his social security number down in Texas where he disappeared. So he's a jerk, obviously, but I don't know if he's dead. I don't know. He might be alive, or somebody's using his soch. I don't know. But I always wondered that, because he cut off everybody in the family, every single person, my aunt, brother, his brother, and father and his stepmom, everybody. Nobody ever heard from him again. So this one thing is one of those things I'll probably always wonder about, if that was why. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, well, the banshees can, warn of like illness. It doesn't always have to be death. And certainly banshees sort of evolved as, death was less imminent, and there were more doctors and more modern medicine. They would still appear to warn you of something, someone going ill or things like that. But I certainly, it sounds like it was some kind of warning ghost. And you can't ever really quite explain why it appeared and terrified 2 4-year-olds and what that purpose was, but it certainly changed the path of your life. So it had that purpose, and showed you that you actually do have those abilities, because most people can't. As I said earlier, people will go many, many years or sometimes their entire life without ever having any kind of paranormal experience and still be interested in the paranormal.
Oh, yeah.
And in fact, I just completed a book in which I interviewed people about, sort of their paranormal experiences. And I had several fairly well-known paranormal investigators tell me that they basically told me of their first experience, and that they had been working as, investigating and interested in the paranormal, but had not had an experience themselves. And so they shared that sort of turning point when it became, when they know it wasn't that they lost their cynicism, because you do need a certain amount of ability to sift through, because there's a lot of crazy stuff out there.
Yeah.
But, it kind of was that turning point that made them really start to empathize and understand that the paranormal is more than just, something to read about in a book, but it is something that many people experience. And some people have negative experiences. It's more about your person, it can be very personal, and your personality can play into, whether you're afraid of these things or not, or whether you welcome them.
Well, you talk about, I've worked with paranormal investigators that never had an experience, but they're still interested like that. And I've been there for some of their first experiences, which is cool. But, I'll add one more tidbit to this is when I became a paranormal investigator, me and my wife my mother bought us classes at Purdue North Central. They were extracurricular paranormal investigation. And our teacher, Mike McDowell, took us out to this haunted location and just for like group EVP sessions and stuff like that. And after we were done, there was a little bar down below because it was this banquet hall we did it in. And we all went down for drinks afterwards. And there's like 10, 15 people there from the class. And we're all telling our different paranormal stories. And he stops the table, goes, "Stop, wait, hold on." Because I hear Jason over there talking about a green floating head. And I just heard a minute ago, this lady over here, I don't remember her name now, she's just mentioned something about a green floating head. He's like, "All right, let's compare." So he had each of us tell what we had. I told him my story, and then she told me hers. And she was Irish descent background too. And then she heard a woman crying. She was in her bed. She was about 4 years old or 5 years old, and she heard a woman crying. And she got up out of bed to go to her parents' room. She was scared, wanted to go crawl into her parents' bed like a kid would, and went into her parents' room. And floating above her father's head was this green floating head. And that's the only time I've ever found anybody else tell me about a green floating head. I've researched on the net. I've typed in green floating head. I've looked up. I've never found anybody else. That's the only time. But,
Now, I remember not long after, I had not heard the full story, but when I sent you the book initially, you mentioned that you had had this experience. And I actually found a little excerpt.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not in the book, but I have excerpted from this author in the Banshee book. His name is Elliot O'Donnell, and he was a very interesting man. He was a sort of a paranormal investigator and, a folkloric collector. He was Irish, and he collected a lot of ghost stories and a lot of sort of, the tales of the people. But unlike many other people who were collecting stories at that time, who were sort of doing it more with a scholarly perspective or a literary perspective. And although he is a great writer and, certainly could hold his own against some of the best Irish writers out there, he actually had experiences when he was about 9 years old. And so he had quite a few very profound paranormal encounters. And so all of his work is definitely less, less ethnocentric than some of the other collections that are out there, and certainly less snobby.
I noticed that in some of the writings. There's some snobbishness, some of that.
Certainly, and there's this overlaying kind of, understanding that if it's not of the Christian faith, then it is, somehow inferior. And that's not a dog at Christianity in any way.
No.
That's just what was happening during that period of time when these oral stories were becoming recorded, particularly in Ireland and Scotland and Wales, where people were sort of, considered peasants, and, there were the sort of more aristocratic literary folk coming around and, recording what the old guys at the pub were saying.
Right.
In any case, Elliot O'Donnell is the man's name, and so he wrote about collections of ghost stories, and he wrote a lot about banshees. And after I talked with you, I actually I was rereading some of his stuff just for fun, because it's really a great read. And there were several accounts where he kind of talks about some of the counterparts of banshees and gets into some of the ghosts that you might see in some of the families in Germany have these white women that appear, in white gowns, and that's sort of their warning ghosts. Anyway, he talks, there's a couple instances in which he talks about disembodied heads, and it's in the same section as banshees. He doesn't mention them being green. I think in one of them they're gray, or in the other one it's surrounded by a mist. But he does specifically say something about disembodied heads as these warning spirits. And yeah, I just kind of happened upon that after I heard a little bit of your disembodied head story.
Yeah,
So
yeah, no, thank you. I read that, and that was really cool
yes,
to see the closest reference so far I could find. That you found.
yeah.
I've seen to
I
what I
promise
experienced.
you, if I find anything about a green disembodied head in any old
Yeah,
past,
please.
I'll be the first to know.
Yeah, because I've been looking at it for years, and I'm not an experienced researcher of any kind. I mean, I'm just the internet warrior typing away trying to find out some information. I've looked in libraries too, but never found anything. I've just not found anything. I had I was on a radio kind of radio show. It's a YouTube show, Spooky and Raven. Oh God dang it! Sorry Raven. Sorry Spooky and Raven. Anything but ordinary. There we go. And Spooky had mentioned her grandmother was Irish, from Ireland, and had messaged her after the show and told her she thought it was a puka. So what's a puka? Like maybe mine wasn't a puka, but I found that interesting. Started reading into pukas because that's in your other book, your fairies, pukas, and changelings.
So, well, I will say, everything that I've written about is, there's a lot of malleability, and especially with certain regions and parts of the world, they may use a different term for one thing or the other. But to the best of my knowledge, I would not call that a puka. A puka is generally more of a trickster spirit and almost always appears as an animal. Most
That's what I read.
Or a rabbit, but it can also appear as an eagle or a crow or raven or a few other there's a handful of other black dogs with glowing eyes are sometimes considered to be pukas, although those kind of go more the hellhound route.
Which I've had a fascination with, actually, for
yeah,
many
I mean,
years.
hellhounds are amazing and terrifying. And there's actually, a lot of those kind of animal ghosts that cross over animal sort of fairy spirits. So pukas are definitely in the fairy kingdom. They, as I said, they're sort of a trickster, but they don't really cause. There are a few stories of them causing enough mayhem or terror that it leads someone to, for example, fall off a cliff, or throw themselves off a cliff in order to get away. However, they don't really exist to try and kill you or harm you. They really are just trying to take you to the edge of terror, and in many instances just they're trying to teach you a lesson of sorts, whether that's stop staying out so late and stumbling home along the cliffside path, or if it's reevaluate where you are in your life and make some changes, or if it's just recognize that there are things out there in the night that can take you on these wild rides. And so there are a lot of stories of, someone will be walking along a road at night, and they'll see the glowing eyes of the puka, and it'll be this black horse with red glowing eyes. And the next thing they know, they're on the back of the puka, and they're going on this ride that they're sure they're just going to leap off a cliff. And, that you lose all sense of time. And then the next day you wake up on the side of the road in a ditch, and you just think, no, was that a puka? Or was that one too many? So they actually tend to play in that area of preying on town drunks. One of the best examples of a puka is in Harvey, which is an old movie with Jimmy Stewart, and he plays this man named Elwood P. Dowd, and he even refers to Harvey as a puka. And Harvey is the 6-foot tall rabbit that follows him around and has conversations with him, and basically makes everyone think that he's crazy, and his sister is very embarrassed of him. So they like to kind of mess around with people's sense of reality and sobriety.
It reminds me of Donnie Darko too, because
Donnie Darko, that is also an example of a puka, a cinematic puka, where it's and he's
very creepy
that
one.
So menacing, but it's a rabbit also, right? So
very creepy one, very creepy.
Yes, I even found a few references to stories that seem to give way somewhat to like the kind of idea of the headless horseman. There were instances of hearing, what they would say, oh, that's the puka out there. And it would be, you could hear the horses whinny. And when you looked out, you would actually see a carriage that looked like, a hearse attached to, 6 black horses or things like that. Or you would have, a rider who is on the back of the horse who didn't appear to have a head or didn't appear to have, a full body, but you could see the cloak. And so there were a few instances of this, which I think probably gave way to the, the idea of the story of the headless horseman. I'm sure he read some of these old or heard a lot of these old tales, and it just sort of developed in his imagination.
One of the things, you talked about your mom's bookcase, and we might have to save some of this conversation until after the next commercial break, but my mom's bookcase had Chariots of the God by Eric Van Daniken and Aliens. So I grew up with a lot of alien stuff.
Oh, alien stuff. Okay.
But one of the things that I've heard from UFOologists, people into the whole alien thing, is that they've thought, and of course they brought this up like a billion times, I think, on Ancient Aliens, is like pukas and banshees or some of these like Irish myths and other cultures' myths were really alien interaction or something like that, disguising itself as what these people's expectations were. And you wonder,
right.
Especially fairies. Fairies have been compared to the alien deal quite a bit. I'm not saying it's interesting.
I would be more inclined to say it's the other way around, that what people are thinking of are aliens are actually more likely to be fairies or
it's
some kind of...
what is it? What all of it is semantics. You call it
right.
an alien, I call it a fairy, tomato.
Right, and if you're saying alien in the sense of like it's foreign to you, then it really...
Another dimension.
But and when you were doing the weird news and there was a woman with a doll, it did make me think of stories. And I've had a few people write to me and say, I thought I had like a poltergeist, but I might just have a hobgoblin in my house. Things are missing. Things are out of place. I can never quite trace what I've done with certain things. When things are kind of go missing, sometimes people think there's a spirit in their house or a ghost in their house, which there can be. There are playful ghosts that will move things around or try and get your attention. But a hobgoblin is, sort of a creature that lives in your house and takes your things and gathers things and sometimes helps with the chores or will move things around that they think should be done in a certain way. And if you're really lucky, you'll have one that will do the housework for you.
I always forget about that.
No, I had a friend. Oh, what, Rob? Go ahead.
I think I have a clan of them here, but they don't help with the chores.
Well, I got a hobgoblin. He's a 1-year-old kid named Liam that likes to hide my stuff, like my 2 remote controls of my TV. It took us 2 days to find. But, I had a friend. He told me this story, and he's dead honest, an older gentleman. And he bought this house, and when he bought it, they told him, oh, there's an old lady spirit here who likes to clean the house. And he was like, yeah, whatever. And he's like, I am a bit of a slob. And he would come home from work and find his clothes put away that he had left in the basket. He'd find stuff cleaned. He actually cried when he had to sell the house because this was an ongoing thing. I'm like, dude, you got a brownie.
How do you attract them?
Yeah, I want one of those.
Right, I want that.
I need one.
Isn't that a brownie, though? That's what I told him it was.
Yeah, okay, so brownies and hobgoblins, and this is, again, kind of the realm, a certain, I call them like the domestic fairies. And some people, like in Scotland, I think they're called dobbies, which you might recognize.
From Harry Potter.
Yeah. They're called dobbies or dobies, and they all are sort of these domestic fairies that either live, in the barn with the animals, or they live in your house and they help with the chores. But you cannot be completely lazy. So there's a few rules. You can't be totally lazy and expect them to do everything. You have to do your part, and you must feed them. This is key. They like very nice things. They like, lovely cakes and wine or fresh milk. And you can't just give them leftovers like from your plate, like, oh, I didn't finish my corn.
So you can thank them with some offerings. If you're doing work and they want to help you out, and you leave a nice offering for them.
Offering. That's exactly what it is. And if you don't want to do it right in your house, you can leave it outside. I mean, however you want to do it, but there's a certain sort of exchange that has to take place there. And this is just getting back to the woman with the husband with the scratches and the dolls and the pitter patter of weird feet and sounds like that. There are certain goblins and some imps that will come into your house, and if they don't like you, they will pinch you and they will scratch you. And I have often thought of people talking about poltergeists causing, scratches on their chest and things like that. I've often thought, well, you've got an imp. You need to get like a really nice Merlot or something. I don't know what.
Well, we had Deborah and Tony Pickman from the Sally House on here, and he was on live TV and all that. He was scratched, in that house many years ago now. But, he's repeatedly been scratched from being in that house. You've heard about that from a lot of hauntings. You wonder, did the Irish just really investigate this stuff and classified it better than we ever knew?
Well, and I'm not saying that everyone who's had that experience, it isn't a poltergeist.
Course,
I think poltergeists exist also. But sometimes other things can be afoot, and it actually can be very magical and reassuring. And
I just want the cleaning brownie in my house.
I'll that exchange.
I don't drink my wine. I got 5 bottles I never have even touched. Here you go.
Perfect. There you go.
Yeah.
So.
But you have to have good intent too, Jason. You can't just be like,
oh, it's good.
Here's
it's good.
My leftover wine I don't want.
No, it's not leftover. It's not even opened. It's waiting for the brownies. Okay. It's waiting for the hobgoblins to come clean my house. All right, well, we're going to go into our second and last commercial break, and then we're going to take phone calls after that. And we're going to keep talking about hobgoblins, brownies, and we're going to get into werewolves and vampires, another thing I've been completely interested in since I was a kid. But, yeah, we'll give out the phone call lines here when we come back from the break. And, guys, don't forget, if you're having trouble watching on Facebook Live, go to Late Night in the Midlands Radio Network.com. Go on there. You can listen. There's a chat room at Late Night in the Midlands as well, besides the Facebook chat room. I don't get to chat in there too much. I don't chat in the Facebook too much. I apologize. But Jamie is here trying to get your questions. If you have any, give them to her during the commercial break, and maybe we'll call out a few of those, and we'll get you to call in the show. That's the best way to ask the question. All right, guys, we'll be back after this break. Tonight, we have Varla Ventura on with us. We're talking about all things magical creature-wise, banshees, werewolves, vampires, brownies, hobgoblins. We're getting to leprechauns, too. I think that's really interesting as well. You can call into the show if you've had an experience where you think with a magical creature. Please call in and tell us about it. We'd love to hear it. There's a number of ways you can call in. If you want us to see you, there's the video Skype line. That is Soup Live Chat 800 Live Chat, Skype ID. The audio-only Skype ID is JBland 00, or you can call in by phone at 219-230-4444. That's 219-230-4444. Just remember, I only got one phone line on one end here, so if you're calling in and you can't get through, or I put you on hold, or I hang up on you, just try calling back, or stay on hold if I'm able to put you on hold. All right, let's get back to our guest. So we left off talking about hobgoblins and brownies and those kind of creatures. Where does the leprechaun fall into this kind of deal?
Leprechauns are kind of the sleeper hit of the fairy kingdom. I thought I knew kind of the basics of leprechauns, and then when I was researching the fairy book, I hadn't intended to exclude them, but I wasn't really planning on having an extensive section about leprechauns until I stumbled upon some information that I didn't realize. Now, I had heard that leprechauns are actually the cobbler of the fairy kingdom. And you can find even examples of people talking about this in, the 60s and the 70s. There's some leprechaun lore around St. Patrick's Day that talks about the leprechaun being a cobbler. But, the leprechaun being associated with green and wearing green is only really kind of a more modern version. And in fact, the leprechaun was sort of dressed to look like an Irishman of the, maybe the late 1800s, early turn of the century.
People think of Lucky Charms is usually what comes to mind when you think of leprechaun.
And like that bowler hat and that whole deal. I mean, that was sort of like common wear in, a man of finery and or middle to upper class would be wearing in Ireland at the time, and of course Irish immigrants in the United States. So in some ways, that caricature of the leprechaun was sort of, I think, meant to sort of depict like, a funny-looking Irish man or whatever. But leprechauns, in fact, in addition to being cobblers, one of the ways that you can find the leprechaun is from the tapping of his little hammer upon his cobbler's bench. And so it's not at the end of the rainbow where you will find the leprechaun. You will find the leprechaun working hard, deep in the forest, because the leprechaun is very reclusive, generally bachelors, always male, and with a great golden store. Probably those things all go together. Yeah. Being a bachelor, great golden store. They also love fine fabrics, and originally were depicted as wearing red. That was the most common color that they would wear, and they would wear red hats. And there's also the legend of the little red cap, which is the little fairy creature that would wear a red hat and could be seen, throughout the woods. And you will find old illustrations that depict Little Red Cap. So again, this is one of those areas where the images of the leprechaun in one region of Ireland give way to the idea of Little Red Cap over here in another area. And in parts of Scandinavia, of course, you have lovely little sort of house elves that wear red hats, and that eventually gave way to the idea of, Santa Claus in a red hat. So there's this kind of connection with all these fairy creatures that, we can look back today and look at all these traditions and see these things. But the leprechaun is, as I said, bachelor, but not necessarily grumpy, just sort of reclusive and very, very clever.
We do have a phone. As I said, I'm going to stop you right there because I lost him a second ago. We do have somebody on the phone line. I want to let him come on and ask a question. We'll pick up where we left off there with the red cap.
Sure.
Who do we have on the phone line?
Scott Martis.
How you doing tonight, Scott? Thank you for calling in. Do you have a question for our guest?
Well, Jennifer was asking me about that thing, the dinosaur-looking thing in Scotland.
Oh. But we showed
I was trying to get back
earlier
about that.
Oh, yeah. From the World Wide Web of Weird.
I couldn't get it streaming right, so anyway, that whatever the thing is clearly not a monitor lizard. It looks like a Plateosaurus dinosaur.
And for people who know Scott, I was just tell people that might not know Scott Martis here has been on the show before. We've talked about lake monsters like Loch Ness and that before. You're quite an expert in that. So thank you for calling in for that.
Yeah, but I'm skeptical because it looks like a land dinosaur from the Triassic period. So
it looks weird.
Out.
Are you skeptical that it's a sort of photoshopped situation?
More likely, it looks to me like it's a really well-made wooden sculpture of some sort.
That's what I thought. Wondered if it was some kind of sculpture or something.
Wait and see.
That's what you always say about stuff on the World Wide Web of Weird is wait and see. Because I find
that easier to believe than a herd of dinosaurs hiding in Scotland.
Right. Like we wouldn't have spotted them by now.
On land, anyway.
Right. It's
well, anyway, I'll let you get back to your program. I just wanted to pop in with that.
All right. Thank you so much for calling in, Scott.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
All right. Have a good night.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've had Scott on before to talk about like the Loch Ness monster and
I love lake monsters and the legends of different sea serpents. And in the mermaid book, I have quite a few stories about other kind of sea creatures and magical creatures that would kind of fit in the with the Loch Ness and sea serpent realm. So
Keith in chat was wanting to hear some more about mermaids. In fact,
that'd be interesting. We're gonna get to that. We got another caller. Actually, we got Zach on, who always has really good questions. So, how you doing tonight, Zach?
I'm doing pretty good, Jason. Hey, Jamie. Hey, Rob. How's everybody doing?
Doing great. 100th episode. Zach is my number one caller. Him and Laura Lee always call into the show, and always have great questions. So, I shoot away here, Zach.
Well, hey, Varla. It's very nice to meet you. I just want to jump back over to the Banshee topic, actually, because I posted up this question over in the chat a little earlier, and I've wanted to know this for a while, but are Banshees spirits of, like, deceased family members, or like angels and demons? Are they spirits that weren't born with a physical body?
Great question.
That is a great question, and they are not spirits in the same way, at least to the best of my knowledge. They're not spirits in the same way that, you might have like a ghost or something. They do often have the spirit and sort of the mourning spirit of a woman who lost a child or died in childbirth, but that does not, and it is said sometimes that women are, if they die in that manner, that they can be transformed into this sort of supernatural banshee. But to be clear, it's not in the same terms of like becoming, like the spirit of a human. It's sort of more embodying that mournful. It's more of like a transformation into that. But more often than not, in everything that I've read, it's one way to tell if it's a banshee or it's a ghost is to know if it is the spirit of a deceased person that you know or that you knew to have actually lived. And if it is, then it is not a banshee.
Okay, cool. Okay, and since you're on the topic of leprechauns as well, just I wanted to know exactly what was the origin of the belief that I heard this ever since I was a kid, that apparently at the end of a rainbow that there's a pot of gold that belongs to a leprechaun, or if you catch a leleprechaun, one of your wishes is that
you get my lucky charms.
They can grant you 3 wishes. That's what is the origin of a lot of these myths surrounding these beings?
Well, for one thing, leprechauns are very, very crafty. And I don't know if you've ever tried to get to the end of a rainbow, but it's a fool's errand.
Right.
Because it's a refraction of light. It's going to keep moving. You're never going, it's like, when you're driving, it looks like the moon's riding alongside you. So it's a fool's errand. And the leprechaun is famous for sending people on fool's errands and outsmarting them in order to make away with the gold. I do think you see, because of the climate in Ireland in particular, you see a lot of rainbows, and you can sort of naturally see that this would be a magical place, and it would be sort of pointing. I mean, we have aeons of ancient mythology based around rainbows and, iris and what our eyes are named after, and the refraction of light and all of this. So we can see that rainbows are, and even today you see a rainbow and you feel lucky, and it's a beautiful thing. So I think there's a natural progression to say like, oh, well, there's a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow. But I also think that that's more of a turn of phrase, as in it's a fool's errand. You can go out spending years searching for a leprechaun. And I have a few stories in a book about, people who went out and basically, instead of working hard, they waited to try and catch the leprechaun. And in the end, of course, the leprechaun outsmarts them. And then the guy who actually works hard, they think he's in cahoots with the leprechaun. So he kind of loses social standing, but he isn't a pauper. So, there's just a lot of kind of back and forth about that elusive pot of gold that the leprechaun carries and hides, and that man is always seeking. It's almost like the Holy Grail, the whole story of the Holy Grail and this like goblet that we're still, convinced someone will find.
One of the stories you told me is about the guy who gets the leprechaun, treats it really badly, and then leprechaun. He wants his pot of gold, and he gives him he said, "No, take my bag. It'll give you endless supply." And it's got one coin in it, but just it'll always have one coin in it. And of course, when he gets to the bar and buys around for people, he
buys food for everyone. It's everything on me. It's on me. And then when the innkeeper's kind of glaring at him, she's like, "All right, it's time for you to settle up." And he pulls out the coin, oh so proudly, and puts it down. And then he reaches back into the leprechaun's magical purse, and it's empty. But most often, the leprechaun has this magical purse, and that you're supposed to procure that, not actually a pot of gold. It's the magical purse that has the endless coins in it. But of course, in this story, the leprechaun just switches it for a common little sack and hands it to the guy. And
one coin in it. It doesn't have one coin in it. Just one.
One coin in it. Yes, it does. One gold coin.
Well, thank you, Zach, for calling in, man. You always have such great questions.
Hey, man, would I be permitted just to ask one more question?
Go for it, Zach.
This one's been sitting on my mind. I promise I'll keep it as short, as sweet as possible. Okay, so whenever I see many of your topics that you've covered, such as like werewolves, vampires, leprechauns, and all that, I can't help but refer back to the movies, the two movies, Hellboy, actually, to where there was like a separate society of these mythical creatures. So my question is, do many of these beings have their own separate society from our world as we know it? Could you be able to give an example of that, like their economy, their political system, and would this be more terrestrial or interdimensional?
Well, that's a great question. I think, like, as far as it being interdimensional versus terrestrial, to me, it kind of sort of interdimensional is a relatively new term that we once upon a time just called the fairy realm, and you could access it through a few different ways. Falling asleep in a fairy ring, entering in through something that was known to be a fairy door, or through a fairy well, or another kind of portal. Sometimes there's trees that are associated with fairies specifically, that if you fall asleep underneath, you can have an encounter. And you even have this in Midsummer Night's Dream, where, he kind of passes out and the fairies all start dancing around him. So to me, it's kind of a coexisting thing. I don't know if I really would go so far as to say interdimensional, but that's just not a term I use a lot. I just think of it as the fairy kingdom, and it exists around us, and it's always been here, and it will always be here. And there is, there's certainly, just like in human society, there are people from different parts of the world, and they are known for different products and economy and things like that. We have that in the fairy kingdom. We have, counterparts or similar creatures in the north that are in charge of, something in particular in the winter that, the climate's different in Ireland, so it might be different. Or in Mexico, it would be, different. So I think there's a bunch of different kind of structures to the fairy kingdom. Do they all get together and cavort? I mean, there's a lot of beautiful stories about situations like that, and tons of amazing art depicting that. But for the most part, the stories that you really actually read are sort of isolated events. And the rare occasion that people today are having these experiences, they tend to, for example, if you're going to, you'd make an offering to something in your house that you would want to do the chores, that's not going to be the same thing that would be in your garden helping your plants grow, nor would it be, the same thing that would look after the children in the night or steal them in the night.
Oh, that's creepy. Well, thank you, Zach, for calling in.
All right, Jason, thank you so much for allowing me to call, man. Congratulations on a 100 episode, guys.
Thanks, bud.
I always look forward to the show, always on Sunday, and definitely excited to always be watching it in the future.
Well, thank you, and keep calling in with your great questions, man. You always do.
All right, well, have a good night, everybody.
You too, bud. Yeah, we're getting on to, we talk about the fairy kingdom and stuff like that. Now, when you get into things like changelings or werewolves, things that are maybe human but take on another form, I found reading the fairies, or not the fairies, the Banshees, werewolves, and vampires. All the old tales that you found, especially the werewolf ones, are so gruesome for something written. So something that happens in the 1600s. I mean, children being ripped apart. This is stuff that we talk about our horror movies in Hollywood and the violence. Well, they wrote it down plenty violent in the 1500s.
Yeah, modern times have nothing on the Middle Ages in terms of torture and horror.
And it is gruesome.
Sure. It's very gruesome. And one thing you'll find, and I certainly found a very common thread, and this is, I record and I write a lot of stories, but there are a lot of things that I toss out or I analyze in a different way. And some, that I toss out in meaning I wouldn't put them in the book just because I read them and they were in this old book doesn't mean that I believe them.
Right.
And you will find that while it was much more common to call someone a witch in those days, you also found people using the term werewolf and vampire in much the same way, and that there was a certain level of persecution if you weren't accused of being a witch, because maybe you weren't an old lady with a bunch of land, then perhaps, there was a murderous rage. There's one story that's in the book of this woman who they realized that she's a werewolf because, there was some suspicions around the village. And then one morning they go there and they discover the husband has been basically torn limb from limb, and he's sort of shredded about, and there's fur everywhere. And, who knows what the real story is there? Maybe something attacked him and, she witnessed it and she was in shock. And when they asked her questions, she denied it. But then they decided that she had a lovely house and a bunch of cows, so she must be a werewolf and she must be carted off and institutionalized. So there's a lot of really, really gruesome stories like that. That accuse people of being vampires and werewolves and other kind of, magicians and in cahoots with this kind of dark magic. That, there's a lot of things that were going on in society at the time to indicate that, the superstitions got the better of people is a nice way of putting it.
Well, I remember one of the werewolf stories, it talks about a peasant family, one of their kids being taken by a werewolf, and they suspect it's the rich family.
Oh yeah,
and that's it ends up being the rich family and the pitchforks and fires. You wonder some of this was just jealousy of peasants. Understand how do these people get all this money? Like you said, the leprechaun deal too. They must be evil or made a pact with Satan.
Well, and when you get you hear about what overtook it in the Salem witch trials and how it went from one young girl kind of accusing another to becoming this huge epidemic where all of these men and women were hanged, and it spiraled. And I don't know, we can really tie this back into the weird news, but you posted that horrible video in the beginning, and people used to go around to public hangings, and it's much in that same. Let's hope we're not going back to the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, but there's a reason they called them the Dark Ages.
Right.
And in some, you see things like that, and you think, God, this is equivalent to that. People doing nothing when someone's suffering, and
watching it gleefully,
and then just being like, oh, that person's dumb, or that person's a vampire, or they deserved it because.
Dehumanizing them.
They're a witch.
Yeah, that's a way of dehumanizing them, to say they're a witch or a vampire.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's you believe there's some truth to this, though. You believe there's some truth to these tales that people could have been having changed into a werewolf, for example.
Oh yeah. Medically, there are things that would make you look like a werewolf, and in fact, there's medical issues. There's also this incredible, huge book by this man named Sabine Baring-Gould, who was a reverend in England in the mid 1800s. He traveled around and he spent a lot of time in especially Scandinavia and parts of Siberia, and he recorded werewolf stories specifically, and he wrote this massive book about it. Now, he was a reverend, and he wrote Onward Christian Soldiers as his most famous contribution to that most people know him by. But he was also a writer, and he was fascinated with werewolves. And he made several very interesting points in this incredibly difficult to get from point A to point B volume, this tome that he wrote. He does talk about the natural human ability to sort of transform when you're angry, or when, you're preparing for battle, or you just get, so mad. He even talks about hormonal women and pregnant women having the ability to transform like a werewolf. This may be why the publication never really saw much shelf time. But his point, which, you have to kind of take that all with a grain of salt, but his point is very valid in that, all of us have had an experience in which we have been so angry or so upset that we have, seen red, or just felt that fury. And that indicates that, we have that ability to sort of, go into a murderous rage. And because of that, he uses that to purport that it's not a big leap to imagine that someone could transform themselves into a beast and therefore become a werewolf.
And then you look at some of the Native American traditions, and I even know for the Celts, and that they could wear skins of animals,
sure,
and either become the animal, or always fascinate me. They really get into this if you're a Game of Thrones fan, especially in the books, about wargs that they can travel into another animal.
Sure, like a shape-shifting kind of thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of the werewolf stories that are that have origins in the United States have a lot more to do with shape-shifting, and a lot less to do with this kind of wolf lurking in the woods, the lone wolf. But definitely, there's you also have to keep in mind, and I'm obviously I'm a believer, and I believe in werewolves, but you have to keep in mind, again, that the people who were recording these things and who were putting it into the written record, which is, we have the written record of the oral record. We don't have the oral tradition. Not in terms of what was happening in, Viking territory or whatever, this guy was traveling around in the 1800s. But he was looking at it as if these people were doing these strange rituals, and they were these crazy pagans who were doing things. And so there's a time in which those things, because it was unknown and because it didn't fit the faith of the person who was writing or recording or making the laws, it became frightening, and it became, something scary. And then that evolved into kind of the, the horror werewolf that we have today.
And then, I think my fascination with vampires probably started with reading Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah,
that was my first vampire novel. And then the second one, and my dream interview would be to interview Anne Rice, is Interview with a Vampire.
Yeah,
I've read that book so many times.
You never know. She's been known to do things that are, kind of unexpected, and reach out to fans and things like that.
I should try.
Now,
got to.
Did you, in the book, have you gotten to Clarimond yet? The chapter is called Beauty and the Priest.
No, I haven't. I'm at the very end of the vampire part.
Okay, so there's one story that is in its entirety in there, and it was originally called Le Morte Amoureuse, I think, and I don't speak French, so I'm sure I butchered that. But
welcome to the Butchering Club.
Yeah, all right. But it's called Clarimond, and it's was actually one of the first vampire stories ever written. It was published in France, and
I did read that. I do remember.
Yeah, and it's actually very racy. Well, it was French, so a little more cutting edge, and it's very racy, and it's about this this little necrophilia in there. I mean, it's got it all, right? And that actually was one of the vampire stories that of course. Bram Stoker had, he was an amazing writer, and he also had a pretty vast knowledge of local lore, folklore from different
Irish.
parts of the country. And also just kind of, some of the horror story. He did a wonderful job of taking some of the horror stories of history and melding them all into this, this evil Vlad Dracula character. So, he took bits from this and that and made it very plausible. And today, we think, that is the most iconic vampire we can think of is Dracula. And
the book stands the test of time, in my opinion.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
And I think it's because he did a great job of actually just preying enough on fact and merging it in with fiction in this way that makes you think, well, actually, that seems right. Like that could probably happen. And, it kind of stays with you.
And, that story always has. That I don't know what it was about Bram Stoker's Dracula when I was a kid, and I picked that up because they were coming out with a movie with Gary Oldman, and Francis Ford Coppola, and I was seeing the previews. I'm like, never read it. I've seen the Bela Lugosi, when I was a kid, old reruns of that movie and all that. I'm like, I'm gonna read Bram Stoker's Dracula. When I was a kid, I was reading novels at the age of in grade school, So I had to read it, and I was hooked, sucked. I don't know how many times I read Bram Stoker's Dracula.
I still read it. I read it like again every few years because I feel like I get something different out of it, and it's a pretty fast. Especially if you've read it 4 times before. But every time I see something different with it. So it's pretty amazing. And there's actually I have a short Bram Stoker story in the vampire book. He had several, I think it's called Dracula's Guest. And it's sort of almost like a prequel to Dracula, again, form of a letter. I think it's probably at the very, very end of the book.
I haven't gotten there yet. I would have totally drooled when I saw that.
It's a nice little bedtime story for you.
Yeah.
But he had a whole collection of stories in his desk when he died, and his widow that he deemed not worthy of publication. And his widow, I can't remember what year he died, so I'm not even going to I'm not going to get it. But his widow gathered these things up. I want to say it was in the 20s or 30s that this other collection was published. But it might have been earlier than that. And she, found this thing, and it had a letter in which, he had kind of said, this is what I don't like about this story. And he had never apparently submitted them to any publisher. He had just...
We're our own worst critics.
that he had ruled out. And there's one that's called Dracula's Guest. And he may have written it after he wrote Dracula, but it's kind of a prequel,
Right.
Marriage breaks down next to a cemetery, and he finds a letter that's an invitation to this castle. And it's really wonderful. But there's several. There's a terrifying one about being in the middle of Paris and rats sort of like almost eating this guy alive. There's, I think there's 6 or 7 stories in there that I had never read.
I never heard about this. I never knew that he had a short story collection.
Yeah, you can actually find them. They're in public domain, so you can find them on Gutenberg. If you're not familiar with Gutenberg, it's a great resource for scanned old books.
Yeah.
And if you just type in Bram Stoker, I think it comes up actually.
And one of the things you mentioned in the book was about when we got back to werewolves a little bit here is the Hemlock Grove video. How that it was a fake. It was, and I've shown it on the World Wide Web of Weird. Somebody's like, "That's fake. It was proven here." And I think that was the show Scott Murdis that called in, It was on his show. I think we showed that, and they're like, "Yeah, that's fake. It was proven." But it's still a really scary video. But Hemlock Grove became a TV show on Netflix.
Right.
Big fan of the first season. The rest, second and third season, kind of go downhill. But I don't know if you watched it.
I haven't watched it yet. I don't know why I haven't watched it yet. It's probably because I spend most of my nights writing, but I do need another show to binge watch. And I have heard
Netflix and chill with the Hemlock Grove, because I'm going to tell you what I loved about that show. What I loved about that show is they use a lot of the old mythology, not the Hollywood.
Yes,
typical.
I've heard that about it. Yes,
and the vampires in that are not like they drank the blood of the other vampire, became a vampire. No, they're born. They're born. It's a family line of people, and they have to become a vampire through suicide to complete the transition. Ooh. And I don't want to tell too much more than that, or I'll give the show away. But I remember, from my interest in vampires, I know they always used to think suicides would become vampires. with some, you know, some of the old thoughts about how a vampire could be. Do you believe in that there are vampires, and if there are they like, you know, the old myths, or, you know, I doubt they're like the Hollywood ones.
Well, I mean, I know quite a few vampires, actually.
Really? Oh.
Vampire friends, people who identify as vampires, who, I won't call it a magical approach to vampire belief, but it's probably a little more akin to like a magical community. People who are born or believe that they are born with sort of certain awareness that goes beyond just being psychic or just being sensitive. And in fact, many vampires are, you know, believe that, you know, they might think that they're psychic, or they might have a lot of experiences, and also be extremely empathic. So we have this kind of image of vampires being these like really horrible, evil creatures, but you know, they can be a little needy, not surprisingly, but you know, that is why they have
the psychic vampire. When you talk about needy,
we've all experienced the psychic vampire, that person that just leaves you feeling drained. And a living vampire would identify that as an irresponsible person who has not fully awakened. And so a living vampire goes through an awakening, and that's a process in which you realize, oh, I actually am a vampire. You seek out leaders in the vampire community, and you're tutored and schooled in the ways of a vampire. You take an oath. So there are vampires. They are among us. They, you know, have day jobs. They take their fangs out for, you know, their day jobs, but they're also in the arts, and they're writers, and they make movies, and, you know, they kind of function like, you know, much like a witch would function in modern times. There's plenty of witches out there. They just, you know, sometimes they're working at the library, sometimes they're working at the grocery store, and sometimes they have, you know, an herbal business, you know. So
I know witches. Trust me.
Yeah,
friends that are witches, definitely. But you know, I've never had I've had some friends that were definitely. I had some friends in high school. You remember the Vampire Masquerade role play games? You know, they were into that and stuff like that. You know, my curiosity about the vampires, I would look at, like you do, a lot of the old stories. I remember trying to remember the name of the graveyard in England where they believe there's a vampire in that graveyard, and they always see his black shadow, like jumping over the fences and stuff like that. I would read for like the supernatural. Like undead. You think that there's, you know, we have the vampire community definitely influenced, you know, somewhat from the literature in Hollywood, but do you believe before all that there was vampires?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there are people that, you know, have this sort of seemingly immortality. Perhaps they just outlived everyone that, you know, everyone died before them, and so then they were just like, well, I'm 200 years old, not 50. But there's also, you know, there's a lot of great things that we can see in the natural world that show how the vampire myth evolved, and also kind of give some credence to the idea of a vampire, you know, blood-sucking creatures and things along those lines. There's also a lot of really interesting things in the archaeological record to at least show the evidence that people believed that person was a vampire, because they excavate a burial and it's, you know, someone's got a brick in their mouth, or which was a way to kind of keep a vampire from coming back. You would put a brick in the corpse's mouth, much like, you know, we hear about a stake. Now, there were also a lot of instances, and I think when, you know, in Bram Stoker's era, and when a lot of sort of the vampire stories really started to get roiling, were during the, you know, the times when there were a lot of grave robbing, especially in, like, say, Scotland in the 1600s. And there would be, you know, they were prominent citizens sending out a couple of guys to go and rob a grave because they wanted to use it for medical experiments. And they, you know, to learn about medicine. I mean, our modern medicine has a very, very gruesome past in that way. And that's probably a whole other, that's a whole other show. Yeah. As we're coming on midnight here, I see. Yeah. But you can leave people with that tidbit. But you would have people sneaking into a grave and going to, like, steal a ring off a finger, and the body would have rigor mortis and it would react. But you also would find people would discover someone who looked very well preserved, eerily well preserved, and that there had been sightings at that grave. So, you know, whether that was a vampire or something more like a ghost, you know, there's a gray area there. But there's certainly enough stories that we'd need to believe that I would be deeply disappointed if vampires weren't real.
Right. I was a big Dark Shadows fan too.
Yeah.
Again, that for me, you know, being younger, you know, I'm only 38. I wasn't alive when the original one came out, but they did that one season remake. That's how I got into it. And then of course they end it.
Then they did the movie not that long ago too, right?
Yeah, with Johnny Depp, you know. But I actually watched all the original stuff, and you talk about they have vampires, witches, werewolves, the whole deal in a soap opera.
And they, yeah, I mean, it's great. They're all sort of like living together and, you know, kind of functioning somehow. And, but they do get into like some of the basics of like lore and mythology based around these different supernatural creatures too, just in like sort of in a base way, but they do get into it. So.
And the truth has to lie in the middle somewhere. I mean, you have to think where all this comes from. It had to originate from something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we spend a lot of time trying to disprove what we say are myths, you know, that like the original people might say, or that the peasants said, and only to discover, you know, thousands of years later or hundreds of years later, science proves that what they were saying, what the natives were saying all along is true. That's a sacred spot. That's where all of our water comes from. That's the cave where we were born. That's the fairy mound. Don't stand there for too long. You know, eventually it all kind of, it comes out. Some of it is, you know, ways to keep people closer and, you know, don't send the children off into the bog. There's always those elements, you know, that you don't want them to fall into, you know, the murky deep. So you say there's this kind of creepy thing out there. But then again, there's probably something very creepy looming in there. And do you want to be the person to discover that you were wrong? Late at night in the woods? Probably not.
Well, my research into vampirism, I looked at a lot at serial killers going way back, you know, like, you know, so the old stories. And I think vampires, you know, there's the whole vampire culture, but I think some of that came from civilization back in the day, not understanding what a serial killer is. And how monstrous a human can be, you know. And werewolves, some of those werewolves, early werewolf accounts, very, very similar. Just not being able to believe that someone could go into that sort of murderous rage. And again, that Sabine Baring-Gould does talk about that in his book about, he cites serial killers as an example. You know, I think he might even talk about like Jack the Ripper or something, just saying like, someone that would go to, it's in us. So, you know, you can't really deny that is in all of us. We do have that. Just some of us can control it and some of us can't. Or the Countess Bathory. I'm sorry, I butchered that. But, you know, she bathed herself in virgin blood. She got her fresh virgins and got that blood and they didn't make it.
Yes, it's very interesting, actually. There's some evidence to show that she may have been framed, but...
Really? Ooh.
Yeah.
That's another just night of discussion.
Yeah, that's probably another discussion. But there is the idea that she was one of the most powerful women in that part of the world, and the king didn't like it, and he didn't care much for her. But people were very afraid of her, and she was said to torture, and that she basically got off on torturing people, especially young women, and that eventually led to bloodletting in a desire to stay young and beautiful. And that, again, that falls into the sort of the vampire category, the immortality. There is something that was really popular a few years ago called a vampire facial, in which you took sounds
bad.
That was so gross.
You heard about it, right?
I haven't.
I saw it.
What is
this?
My
goodness,
this sounds really
no
bad.
Way.
I do have kids that watch the show sometimes.
Let her explain it.
Okay, go ahead.
You extract, usually it's supposed to be your own blood, because you take your own blood, they put it in some kind of centrifuge and they separate the plasma, and then they inject the plasma back into your skin, and it's supposed to sort of like plump it up and make it look fresh and new. It's the vampire facial.
And they smear it all around you. So you're sitting there while this blood is like drying and crusting to your face.
Yeah,
And
so draw everything out of the pores, and it's just really
wow. That's the first I've heard of that vampire facial. I was thinking something very pornographic when you said that, but
you know what? Wow. That's probably a better image to have in your head than what it
I don't know. Either one disturbs me deeply. Well, thank you so much, Varla, for coming on.
Thank you. I can't believe it's almost midnight.
I told you it goes by quick.
Yeah, it does. It does. It was a delight.
I'd love to have you on again, talk more about the magical realm of creatures, because there's so much more we could talk about.
I'll send you the mermaid book, and you can take a look at that.
Awesome.
And I have a new book coming out. Probably in October of next year, and that one's all about ghosts and paranormal parlor games and the spiritualist movement and seances and all that.
Fun!
Oh, that's right down my alley.
Yeah, lots of fun.
I gotta read it when you're done.
Hey, if you ever need a blurb, I'm not really famous, but I will give a blurb if you ever need.
Okay, I'll take it. Yeah, I'm shameless. I'll take it.
Not that anybody really knows who I am, but thank you again. Well, you do, but thank you again. I am enjoying the books. That's the biggest perk to me doing this show, is getting to talk to people and getting free books that I'm gobbling up here and loving. So again, we got to get you back on, guys. Next Sunday. Really quick too, Varla. I want you to say the website again so people can find you. Almost forgot.
Okay. It's varlaventura.net. So just my name, VarlaVentura. I think that's how you spell my name, .net. And you can also find me on Facebook, and I think you probably, I don't know if you linked to my Facebook page. But anyway,
I think I did.
I'm the first me that comes up when you search me.
You're very easily found, because I heard you on Jim Harold's show. And started talking about Banshees and stuff like that, and I was like, I gotta. That's when I messaged you about my Banshee experience. Jim's been on the show, so again,
I love
awesome.
him.
Jim is awesome. All right, well, thank you, Varla. We will get you back on the show again to talk about more magical creatures. Next Sunday is our ITC Collective Night show. It is going to have Steve Huff on, Katrina Cooper. We're going to have Jamie D, Bill Perry, I'm sure, is going to be here, Rob Autry. We're going to try to talk to the spirits and see if the spirits want to talk to you. Call into the show. We're going to play a little bit of the evidence we got last time. The spirits were definitely talking to our callers. We had some really great communication. Varla, you want to see if the spirits want to talk to you? Call in the show. It's really interesting. Maybe we'll get a hobgoblin to come through and talk to us. I don't know. All right, guys, have a great night. See you next Sunday. Same bat time, same bat channel, 10 p.m. to midnight Central Time, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern. Have a great night. See you next Sunday.
Have a good night.